Okay, we're going to continue with the second screencast for the Bootcamp 1 for Excel and VBA. And the focus here is going to be on creating plots. Excel is not the best tool, perhaps, for creating plots, but in many cases, it's what we end up using. Can be a little bit tedious and limiting, and we can always consider linking to some other software that provides a better capability for plotting, such as MATLAB. But we're not going to get into that here. We're going to focus on creating plots using Excel. So I'm going to start out with something quite simple here. And of course, I encourage you to just follow along with me and carry out the operations yourself. I'm going to create a little table of Y versus X. Let me center those titles and just put in a few numbers for X. Increasing numbers. And we can imagine that these are some data that we have obtained or collected. So I'm just going to enter some numbers for Y, somewhat random. Okay, so now we're going to create a simple plot of these numbers and go through some of the operations necessary, decisions that you have to make. So I'm going to select the block of numbers, and I'm going to insert on the menu to get the insert ribbon. And in the charts group, I'm going to the one just above the word charts, which says insert scatter XY or bubble chart. And I'm interested in the options for the scatter chart, and it sort of shows me what it's going to do as I do that. So I'm going to use the simplest one, which just provides the plot of just the data points that you can see here, low one here and one back here. Okay, now usually for the plots that we make with Excel, we don't want to work with them on the worksheet itself. The formatting is awkward, sometimes difficult to create something that's presentable. About the only time we use charts on the worksheet is either when we need to see multiple charts at the same time or when we are making adjustments to the numbers on the worksheet and we need to be able to see the impact of those adjustments on the chart sort of in real time. So what we're going to do is right-click in the middle of the chart and select Move Chart and select New Sheet and click Enter. And this gives us the chart of the data. It's somewhat difficult to see, and we'll fix that here in a moment. And so we're going to carry out some operations that are typical in formatting a chart. So one thing we'll notice is that our horizontal scale here is sitting up in the plot because by default it's set up at 0, and we'd actually prefer it to be at -5 so that it's below this data point here. So let's click the vertical axis right click and select Format Axis. And down here under Format Axis text options, there's horizontal axis crosses, and I'm going to select at an axis value of -5, and that moves my x-axis values down below my data points. Okay? So next thing we're going to do is we're going to make our axis numbers more readable. So for this particular one here, the vertical axis numbers that are selected, I'm going to go to Home tab, and I don't happen to have this selected right now, so I'm going to select a font which is Calibri. You may already have that selected, and then I'm going to change the font size to 16 so that it's more visible, and then I'm going to make sure here that it uses a black font color, and then I'm going to come down and select the horizontal axis, and I'm going to go through the same operations here that I just did. And of course, some of these are your preferences, and I'm just showing you what I tend to do. And so I've got those selected now. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust these markers so they're more visible. So I'm just going to click one of them, and you'll notice that all of them are selected. I'm going to come over here to Format Data Series with the little paint can, and we'll start by selecting Marker here and Marker Options, and I'll keep this style of a circular option, but I'm going to increase its size to 10 so it's more visible for us. And then I'll come to Fill and say that I don't want any fill, and down to Border and say that I want a solid line, and I'm going to change that to black, and then I'll change the width of the line to 1.5. So I've adjusted my markers so now they look more visible to us. And then quite often what we do with data, raw data, if we're trying to recognize patterns in the data, is we'll come back and select the data again, and our little paint can is we add lines. I'm going to collect under line, solid line, connecting the data so that we can see patterns. And then here, the line is black, but mine is at 3 point, and that's too thick. So I'm going to take it down to 1.5. And now it looks like this, and that's more presentable, all right? And then we're going to take a look, for instance, at our grid lines here, and I'm going to click one of the grid lines, and it shows that all the horizontal grid lines are selected. And I'm going to come up and change the color to one that's just a little bit darker gray, so you can see that now. I'm going to select the vertical ones, and again, it's the gray one that's right in the middle. That makes the grid lines a little more visible. And again, you don't have to do this, but I'm just showing you what typical customization is. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add axis titles and a chart title. So to do that, I select the plot, and up here, there's a custom menu item, chart design, that comes up, and I get a ribbon for chart design, and I go over to the left, add chart element axis titles, primary horizontal, all right? And so I'm just going to type in X dash axis space title, just as a generic title, and it shows up quite small down here. So I'll go back to my home tab, and again I'll change the font for me and make that 16 and make sure it's dark black. So there's my x-axis title. Then I'll do similarly under chart design, add chart element, axis titles, primary vertical, and then we'll just call that y-axis title. And I'll make a similar adjustment to the font that I did before. And I'm making the titles 16 point, a little bit bigger than the numbers on the axis, which were 14 point. And then the chart title up here is looking a bit small. So I will click that, select it, and change its font, and I'll make it 18 point and make sure it's black. So there's my chart title. So we've gone through and we've customized the chart and we've made it look more presentable. One thing that I will mention here that we are not going to do is if you have a series of different charts which are going to use the similar kind of formatting that we have used here, one way to streamline that is to right-click and say that you want to save this particular chart style as a template. You can give it a name, and then as you're coming along and you're making charts like this, you can just make a generic chart of your data, whatever it is, and then you can apply the template and all of this formatting will be done for you. And we're not taking the time to do that now, but it is worth mentioning, okay? So let's pop over to our slides and just review what we've done here. So this goes through creating the data and inserting the chart, which just plots the data. And one thing you will notice here, there's another option that plots the data and interconnecting straight lines in one selection, which I could have done. And then we'll go on and look at the typical steps that we use in customizing plots. First, move it to its own chart sheet, align and format the axes, adjust markers and lines, add titles and a chart title, and then it shows here how to move and why to move the chart to its own sheet. And then here is going through and formatting the axis where it crosses, and you can do that for the other axis, the horizontal axis, as to where the vertical axis crosses also. And then how do we go about formatting the axis titles? And then we go in and in this case we're adjusting the markers the way we did. And then we're adding and adjusting the lines the way we did. So this just takes you through those operations in case you need to do them again. Here we showed how we could change the intensity of the grid lines. You wouldn't normally want them straight black, but you might adjust the grayscale to make them a little more or less visible. And then adding the axis titles and the chart title, and we end up with something that looked like this. So there's a simple chart, And now we're going to move on, and we're going to consider adding some complexity. First, we're going to consider how we can bring in data from a text file where we might have a lot of data that we're going to plot. And then how we plot the data, and if we have multiple series, how we can distinguish the markers or line styles, add a legend, and then if we have a very large data series, we probably don't want to use markers because that clutters up the plot. We just want to use lines connecting the data and see the patterns. Or if we're plotting analytical functions, we really don't want to use markers since the plot doesn't represent experimental data. And we just want to use line segments to go and create the plot. Okay, so let's pop back over and go through some steps to read in some data from a text file and then create a plot with multiple series. So we're back over to Excel, and let me come back here. And if I want, I started with a generic workbook here. I can save that workbook. And let me browse a bit to find where I want to do that. And we won't have to do that later on. We just do it once here. This is where it happens to be on my computer. And I will just call it simple plot, and I'll store it. Okay. So that's that. And now we can just start a new blank worksheet, either using File, New, all right, and a new blank workbook if we want, just to get that one out of the way. One thing I typically do with a new blank workbook is I change the zoom to a custom zoom of 150% just to make it a little bigger, a little more visible. And you can do that too if you wish. What we're going to do though is we're going to open here, File, Open, or I have the little open shortcut up at the top. And I'm going to, I see a number of workbook files here, but I'm going to go down to the lower right and I'm going to change the type of file to text files. And then I see that it's only showing a couple of files that I have available, and I'm interested in the one that's called furnace data. So I'm going to open that. And now it doesn't quite know how to handle the format of the data of the text files, so it uses this text import wizard. And we notice that we think the numbers are delimited, so we click next, and it shows that we have 3 columns of numbers, and then we can click next, and it would allow us to adjust the formatting if necessary. We don't need to do that. And then we end up with our numbers here in 3 columns. And let me insert, I'm going to do a right click on one and insert an empty row here. And I'm going to just put in some labels here. Time in seconds with parentheses. And then this is going to be fuel rate, and that's just a normalized value. And then this is going to be flue gas CO2, 2, and that's going to be in percent. So I click those, and you'll notice that the formatting here is not very good. One thing I can do to remedy that is I can select the 3 cells here and right-click and format cells and go to the alignment tab. And for text alignment, I can say I would like the label centered horizontally, centered vertically, and I'm going to click wrap text so that it will wrap the title in the cell, and click OK. And then it gives us a heading which is a little more readable for us. And of course, one thing I've been doing here is adjusting a font. So if I select this entire table, remember, tab and back tab, and then change it over to the Calibri font, which I wanted. Did I lose that selection? No, I didn't. Okay, so there. So we've got our table of data, and now what I want to do is I want to make a plot. But one thing about this is that this particular file is still a text file. So what I would like to do is click my F12 key and save this as an Excel workbook called Furnace Data. And I already have one of that name, so I'm going to call it Furnace Data 1 and click Enter. So typically when you read in a text file, the worksheet is still in text file format. So as you customize it, add titles, add formulas, or whatever, you need to change it over to an Excel workbook file and leave the old data file behind in case you need it again, right? So we've done that, and now what we're going to do is select this first 0 here, Control-Shift down and Control-Shift right, tab and back tab, and you see that we have selected all the data. Then we're going to go to our Insert menu, go back to our charts, and we've got a lot of data here, so we're just going to connect our data with straight lines here, the last of the scatter plot options, and here's our chart, okay? So we've got that chart, and as you know, what I recommend is that you right-click that and move the chart to a new sheet and click OK. And now we've got the data on our own chart sheet. And one thing we notice is that we really have a problem depicting these data with just one vertical scale, because these numbers are all up around 50%, and the numbers down here are like in a range of plus minus 3. So I'm going to click this line down here once and right-click, Format Data Series, and the first thing that it presents to us is, would you like to plot these on a secondary axis? So I click that, and now we've created an axis over here to the right, and these data, all right, which are our normalized fuel rate, are now shown, and they're much more readable. So having that in place, what I'm now going to do is go through and I'm going to format the axes and add titles for the axes and for the chart. And I'll go through this the same steps that I did with the previous plot, but I'm just going to move right through them and gain, in this way you can gain some practice with this too. So I'm selecting the horizontal and changing that over to 14 in black, and I'm doing the left vertical, same thing. And also now we have a right vertical, so we'll do the same thing there. Okay, so now we've got those, and now we're going to add titles. So I'm going to go to Chart Design, Add Chart Element, Axis Titles, Primary, Horizontal, and this is going to be time dash seconds. And then right away, I'm going to change the size of that in font to 16, black. Here we go again, Chart Design, Add Axis Titles, Primary Vertical, right? And the primary vertical is going to be fuel rate. Oh, I'm sorry about that. It's primary vertical is flue gas CO2 dash %. And let's adjust the size of that. Here we go. Make it 16 and black. There we go. And now we're going to keep going here. We're going to do secondary vertical. And this is going to be fuel rate, all right? And I'll put a dash and just put normalized to indicate what the units of that are or what they became. And then we'll change our font to a 16 point in black. Okay, so that adds our titles. I can add a chart title up here. Just click in there, do a Control A to select everything and give it a title, Furnace Data Series. Okay. And then change that to an even bigger font, like 18, just like that. Okay, so now we've got those titles. Good. Now, the next thing we want to deal with here, if we bring that down a little bit, you'll see that there's a legend down here under this, and we're going to change that. We're going to click on it, and it gives Format Legend over here, and I'm going to put it to the right of the plot. We'll move it later. And we notice it's fairly small, and it actually doesn't contain very meaningful information. So let's fix that. Let's come and change it to a 14 point black. And then we'll come to our paint can for Format Legend, say that the border is a solid line and select black. And for the fill, we'll say we want a solid fill, but not that one. We just want a white fill, looks like that. And then this particular legend, we can grab it and we can move it somewhere within the plot if we want. If we click in the white space inside the plot, we can stretch this a bit. And again, we can move the legend around until it looks right. But it's not quite what we want yet, because what we notice here is its legend is that in this case, the red-orange line is called Series 2, and the blue line here is called Series 1, all right? And that's not very meaningful. So if we come up to our chart design and do select data, we can select Series 1 and we can edit that, all right? And then we can just give it a meaningful title, flue gas CO2, and click OK. And then get Series 2, edit that, and give that a title, fuel rate. Click OK. And now our legend down here has more meaningful titles, and we have now another thing that we could do here is you'll notice that we have a lot of white space for the orange line on this scale. We really have nothing going on from 0 to 40. So I can click that axis there, and for my text options, I can say I would like to have the axis go from 40 to 70. Now, here you might look at it, you might say, well, I really don't like that much because these curves intersect too much. I can always change that a little bit if I want by moving that back to 30 and the curves separate a bit more, but that's really up to you. Finally, unless we're going to put this chart somewhere where it's going to be documented in color, like on a PowerPoint slide we're going to present, or in a printed report where we're including color in the report, we may want to have our lines just be black. And so a way that we can handle that is I can pick this series up here, click once, and come again to my little paint can and do solid line and say that I want it to be black. And there it is. And then I can pick my other one and say that I want a solid line that's black, but for dash type down here, I can pick a dashed line. Now, that way, as we look at it now, we get rid of this, you can see that it's a little easier to differentiate the two curves, and the legend, of course, has adjusted itself automatically to that. And that is now a pretty well formatted plot where we are depicting two different series where they have distinct scales. So we really need a left and a right axis. So there's your example for that. And let's come back and review through that with our slides. So this takes you through the steps to import the text file. And you'll notice that it's denoted here as furnace-data.txt. And then we see that we note that we have 296 data entries, and we have two variables. And so we save it as an Excel workbook right away. And then we come up and decide what style plot we want to use. And I've got a couple comments I want to make here, because when you do XY scatter plot, you have 5 alternatives. Now, the first one we've used with our first example here, which was experimental data. Usually you don't want to have more than 100 because then the plot looks really cluttered with markers. And then we used just lines for our last data, the furnace data, because we had nearly 300 data, and we used straight lines connecting the data. I mentioned here that you have the option going straight to markers and lines. And then you have two options up here that apply artificial smoothing to the data. And we recommend strongly that you do not use those options, because it can lead to interpretations being made of the data which are bogus. So we recommend against those. Also, there is another category which are more for business graphs, where the x-axis is categories like months of the year, that are called 2D line plots. And for engineering plots, you really want to stay away from those, okay? And then we went through and we created our initial chart. That's what it looks like. And here, we moved one of the series, the lower one here, to the right axis, and the right axis was shown. Now, in this particular one, it shows the plot reversed to what I did with you, because it has moved, whoops, let's go back. It has moved the orange here, which was the CO2, over to the right axis, and the fuel rate to the left axis. That's neither here nor there, but then it comes and we can format it and we can add titles, as we did. And then we went through all the steps shown here to format the legend, and then to change the tags on the legend to things that are more meaningful to us. That shows the steps for doing that. And then going through and formatting and providing a title for the axis on the right and all the axes, and a chart title. And then we moved the legend into the plot and stretched the plot to fill the plot window. And then we changed the line styles to black and white, black line styles, one of them solid and one of them shown over here, picking a dashed format for it so you can distinguish the two. And then we came up with our final plot. So that illustrates that. And now we're going to move on to another example. It's a fairly brief example, but we're going to show you how you can make use of a logarithmic scale axis, okay? So let's come back to our spreadsheet here. And home cell and save this. And then we're going to open a file which you have available to you. And it's going to be an Excel workbook, so we're going to change the type of file to Excel file. And it is called H2SO4 Vapor Pressure Starter. So we're going to open that. And this just shows some data of vapor pressure versus temperature of concentrated sulfuric acid for the temperature from 35 degrees all the way to 290 degrees. And shows the vapor pressure in torr, which is equivalent to millimeters of mercury. The one thing, we'll create a plot of these, and then we'll show you how you can apply logarithmic access to it. So once again, it's for your practice too, is we're going to go through the somewhat laborious steps of creating a plot of these data. I'm going to select the data, tab and back tab. So we've got the data selected. And then I'm going to go to Insert, Scatter Type, and I'm going to go directly to Straight Lines and Markers. Select that one. And that is our plot. And before I move it to another sheet, I just want to point out that you'll notice that the left-hand side, these values are very compressed because the right-hand side has values that go up to about 800. In fact, if I do a little formula here and take the last value of the vapor pressure and divide it by the first value, we see that the ratio of those two is 500,000. So we've got a bit of a scale problem here in working with this plot. We can't see really what's going on down here. And so we're going to select this, and we're going to move the chart. You should be getting used to the kind of operations that I recommend here. And then we look at what we've got, and I'm going to go through this, maybe not in the same order I always have, but we see there's nothing going on between 300 and 350 here. So let's select that axis, format axis, and change the 350 to 300 under text options, and that stretches that plot out somewhat. And we don't go above 800 on this side, so let's override the automatic scaling so that our curve fills the plot a little bit better. All right? And then I'll select the data once here, go to my paint can, say I want a solid black line, 1.5 is okay. And then go to my marker selections. Once again, under marker options, increase that marker size to 10. I'll do a solid fill, which is white, and a border solid line, which is black, and that takes care of that. So now it looks like this. So we're getting there. And now we'll do our what we normally do with our axes, changing this to 16 point and black, and the same down here, 16 point and black, so that's more presentable. And we'll add some chart titles here, chart design, axis titles, horizontal, and this is going to be temperature in degrees C. There we go. Let me handle the formatting of that right away, taking it up to 16, making sure that it's black. And go do the Y one. Y-axis, and that is going to be vapor pressure, and that is in torr or millimeters of mercury. And let's change that to 16, and again make it black. And we can add a chart title up here. And just say that we have vapor pressure of concentrated H2SO4 aqueous solutions. Fix a typo there. Select the whole title. And say that I want, and I need to get that back, sorry. And say that I want 18 font and black. So here is my plot, okay? So that's the third time we've been through this formatting of plots, and we should be getting good at it now, right? So here we go, and what we're going to do now is note how compressed this is. So we're going to select this axis, right-click Format Axis, and then down here under text options, we have logarithmic scale, and there it is applied. So what we see now is we have logarithmic scale, all right, and we sort of lose it here at the top. So we might want to format that axis and say that our maximum is 1000, and then that brings in all the points. And of course, what we can see via the logarithmic presentation is we can see things spread out much more nicely and not compressed down at the low end. All right? So that's that. Let's save this. And I'm just going to remove the word starter. I'll put in a numeral 1 for me. You don't have to do that. And save my file. And then I have that. Okay? So we're going to move on and look at some additional features of plotting. And we're going to start with a new spreadsheet here. I think we'll just start with a blank spreadsheet like this. And come down over here to cell B3, and I'm just going to put in a label X. And we're going to have a series of values from 0 to 5 in steps of 0.05. Now, we could establish a pattern and drag it out, but an easier way to handle this is to put in the 0 and then come up over here on the Home tab under the Editing group to Fill, and then select Series in Columns. Make sure you make that selection. And the step I want to be 0.05. And I want the stop value to be 5. And click OK. And it creates my series. And let's pop down to the bottom to see that's about 100 points. And it ends at 5. Okay? Now, if we don't like the format of those numbers because it's inconsistent, we can select this and go to our number group and just change the numbers a bit so they use a consistent format. That's up to you, whether you want to do that or not. So what I'm going to do is add a column here for the plotting of an analytical function. And I'm going to put a single formula in to the right of the 0, and it's going to be equals cosine, COS, of that cell, cosine of B4 times COSH of that cell. So it's the cosine times the hyperbolic cosine minus 1, and enter. And that turns out to be 0, but that's okay. And now what we're going to do is we're going to extend that formula all the way down. We're hanging on the column to the left, and we're going to double-click the fill handle down the lower right-hand corner. And this evaluates all the numbers that end up at the bottom at 20, all right? So this is now the evaluation of an analytical function. So let's select all the data. Whoops, I think I lost my selection, sorry. Go. And we're going to insert a plot. Again, an XY. And here, just scatter with straight lines. And there is our plot, right? And we're going to work with this a little bit now, fairly quickly. Let's move the chart to its own sheet like we commonly do. And here it is. We notice that our horizontal axis is crossing at 0, and it might look better if it crossed at -2. So let's select this, right-click, Format Axis. Horizontal axis crosses at -2. Excuse me, I meant -20. And now it's down there. And then notice that we don't need this to go down to -25. We can just make it -20. And it can go up to +20, like so. And then our horizontal axis doesn't need to go beyond 5. So let's fix that. And we get our chart. The scale's reasonably well formulated now. So I'm going to click my series, go to the paint can, change the line. Whoops, did I lose that selection? And change it to black. And I'll change it up to width 2. And so that's what it looks like now. All right. And then I'll do my usual reformatting here. I'm going to take my horizontal axis, go to the Home tab, and change it to 14 black. And then you'll notice that it's giving me extra 0 here that I don't need. So let's come over to Format Axis. Last item down here is called Number. And it says it's giving me 2 decimal places, and I'm going to change that to 1. So that makes that look a little more compact. And then we'll come over and do our normal change over here to 14 and black. All right, so we've got that. I'll take the time. We're going to go to Chart Design, make this pretty quick. Add axis titles, horizontal axis title X. And that's just a single letter, so I think I'll make that 18 point instead of 16 point to make it a little more visible. And then do my vertical axis and make that Y. And again, change that to an 18 point font and black. Okay, so now we've got that. And if I want, I can come up here and do Control A on the chart title and just give it a title, plot of analytical function. And make this an 18 point. And there we go, okay? So that shows you how we plot an analytical function. And one additional feature that we can do is handle annotations here. And we'll do a shortcut on this by going over to our slides. So this shows our vapor pressure plot, and then how we set for the logarithmic scale. And then we did the autofill of this and created the plot we've seen. But you'll notice that here in PowerPoint, whoops, let's come back. Let's come back to the actual slide. So I escaped out of that, and I'm going to select this. What I want to do is select this equation and put that onto the plot. And it's not letting me do that. And I don't think it let me do it when I looked at the slide, did it? No. Okay. So I'm just going to make mention of the fact, if we go back over to our spreadsheet here, that it's possible for us to add an equation to this. And the normal way you would do this is by inserting an object with your equation typesetter. If I come back over to my sheet and go to text on the insert tab and do object, it lets me insert an object. And so you may have equation editor. I have something called math type equation. So it allows me to put in like y equals cosine of x, and maybe a little dot here for cosh of x minus 1. And then I could say that I wanted to show that 0 less than or equal to x less than or equal to 5, right? So if I do that, it embeds that on my spreadsheet. And if I cut it, Control X, go to my chart, Control V, it shows up here, and I can bring it down here, something onto the plot to show more information. You can do that with the equation editor that comes with Excel. I happen to have one that's a little fancier that's called math type. Okay, and then you can also add things to the plot, with the insert command, and you can add a variety of things here if you want to add shapes. You can add an ellipse here someplace or whatever and continue to customize the plot. Okay, so that's enough of that. So let me do a save of this. I have to go back and find my folder here. Bear with me. And I'll just call this analytical function plot. And I'll add a numeral 1 to that. And so that's saved. And so now I don't need this one anymore. And we can move on to a couple more examples that we have, right? So I'm going to just go to a blank starting workbook. And I'm going to import another text file. So I'm going to open and browse and change my type of file to text files. And I'm going to open a file called concentration data. Now, the preview here shows that it's just a single column of data with no particular formatting. So I can click Finish here, and it just shows my data. Let me change the zoom on this again to what I do customarily, which is 150% zoom, so you can see it better. And then I'm going to select the entire column of data, and I'm going to provide a name for it, which is capital C-O-N-C for concentration. All right, C-O-N-C. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to create a bar chart histogram of these data, things that you might have done in an applied statistics course, such as applied data analysis at CU. And so what we're going to do is start here and just get some idea of what we've got in terms of the number of data and the range. So I'm going to just put in some labels here. And min and max. And let me justify those. And for n, I'll just put equals count of CONC. So we have 197 data. I'll do equals min, equals min of CONC. So the minimum is 16.1 and the maximum is 18.2. So we have 197 data. We have 16.1 to 18.2 range. So when we're going to count frequencies for a histogram, we need to know the intervals that we're going to use for that. And there are a couple different ways of providing a guide on the number of intervals to use. One is simply the square root of the number of data. And that's 14, more or less, all right? So it says that way you could use 14 intervals. And a more conservative way to do it is to take the integer part, it's int, of the log of the number of data, base 2 log, comma 2, minus 1, there. The integer part of log 2 of the number of data minus 1, and that's 6. So this says that I should be using somewhere between 6 and 14 intervals for my data. So what I'm going to do is select some intervals over here, which we colloquially and typically call bins, B-I-N-S, and I'm going to start a little bit below the minimum data point. So I'm going to start at 16.05, and then I'm going to use an interval of 0.2. So let me make this adjustable, and I'll put that over here, and I'll say that this is equal to this plus that. And I don't want that to shift, so I hit F4. And then my max is 18.2, so let's get past that. Almost there. Okay, I'm past 18.2. So how'd that work out? How many intervals do we have? 1, 2, 3. I've got 11 intervals, and that's between 6 and 14, so that looks pretty good. These are the dividing points, and the interesting thing about choosing it this way is that the resolution of our data is 0.1, so we'll never have a data item that falls right on a boundary, because our boundaries are always at a 0.05. Okay, so let us select these, and I'm going to type in name bins, B-I-N-S. And then we're going to jump in and we're going to use a built-in function in Excel called frequency. So we're going to type equals frequency, and it wants the data array, which is CONC, and then it wants the bins array, which B-I-N-S. There we go. And there are our frequencies. So what has happened here is that it says that between 16.25 and 16.05, we have 3 items, all right? And then it says greater than 18.25, we don't have any, but we knew that because the max is 18.2. So this gives us our frequencies, all right? And then what I'm going to do is select these frequencies, and I'm going to go to Insert Charts, and I'm going to pick just a simple bar chart. So there is my histogram, okay? Now, it's not there yet. We need to do some work on it. So let's move it to its own chart. So this is what it looks like. Looks pretty symmetrical, looks somewhat replicating a normal distribution. And we can do some work on it. So let's start by making our axis numbers bigger, more readable. And this one. So these are the frequency or counts. Now the problem we got down here is we've just got numbers here from 1 to 12, and that's not very useful because all that it does is it counts from 1 to 12 these numbers here. So what we would like to do is add numbers there that are meaningful. And the meaningful number for 3 is that it's between 16.05 and 16.25. Now, there are a couple different ways to do this, but one typical way is to just calculate the midpoint between that will be the center of the bin at 16.15, and then drag that down, and it gives us all the bin centers, okay? And so if we do that, and I am going to come back and look at that chart, because we have number 1 here, which is not very interesting. Let's go look at our data, select data, and let's look at our series and edit that. And that series starts in F2, and I think I prefer that it start in F3, so I'm going to edit that. And if I click OK, you'll see now it just includes, it doesn't include that 0 to the left. It's just a minor adjustment. And so coming back to select data, I'm going to edit the horizontal axis labels, and I'm going to come back and pick the bin centers for those and click OK and OK. So now we have numbers here that correspond to the centers of these bins. A little more meaningful for us, right? And so having that done, all right, about what remains here is to add a little bit in terms of cosmetics, which I will now do, and then we'll move on. Let's start. Format chart area, border. Let me pick a solid line and click OK. Format grid lines, maybe make these horizontal ones a little bit darker, which I've done before. Then I will come over to this axis and make a solid line to the right of that axis. Let me make sure these are black, black, and these also. Let's deal with some axis titles quickly here. Horizontal is going to be concentration value, and I'll put a dash bin center and a dash in grams per liter for my units. Let's change that font. To 16 black. And again, my vertical. And this is just frequency, or the number of counts. Let's change that again. And there we go, and we're getting there, all right? I can make a title up here if I want. Histogram of concentration data. Oops. And let's adjust its size as we typically do. And there we go. All right. The last thing that I might do is get into customizing my bars here by selecting them, use my paintbrush and look at the fill, and maybe pick a pattern fill of some sort, such as a hatch pattern. Maybe change the color of that to a dark gray, and then have a border which is a black line. And then they look like that, right? And this gets us to something that's more presentable, and we can work with this and use it as a histogram of our data. It's also possible to consider next to this a line or a set of bars that would correspond to something like a normal distribution that models these data, but we won't take it to that extent. So let's make sure that we solve this, save this, and I'm going to call it concentration data 1 and save it. And so there you have the creation of a histogram. So the last two examples that we're going to have here are going to deal with contour plots and surface plots, right? So we're going to open a file. Let's go to Excel workbooks. I'm going to go to analytical function starter. There it is. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to create a set of values like we have done before, where this value will correspond to this item and to this item. We're going to do it a little bit differently using a data table, which is something else you may be familiar with Excel, but if not, it's a very good technique to know how to use. So let's come back over to our slides. This was our histogram. Showed how to change our numbers to the bin centers, and then to complete the formatting of the chart. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a table using this particular function here, all right? So bear with me and we'll go to our spreadsheet and show you how we do this with a data table. So to make it a little more visible, let me zoom this up for you a little bit. Even though we can't see the entire table, it'll make it a little easier for you to see. So what we're going to do is we're going to put in cells here for X and Y and Z. And I'll bounce back and forth a bit. You can see that z is a function of x and y according to that. And so we'll just put in the range of values here for both. We'll use this one here as y and this one here as our x values. And that range goes from -2 to +2, all right, in steps of 0.1. And I just prepared the spreadsheet like that so we wouldn't have to do that manually here. So let's just put in a couple of example values here, 0.5 and -0.5 for x and y. And then let us create a formula for that. And I can make this a little bit easier if I transfer these labels over as names on these cells, which we've done in the previous screencast. So I'll go formulas, create from selection, OK. And now this is called X, this is called Y, and this is called Z or Z, all right? So let us create our formula. It was equal, I believe, 89, right? Plus 0.04x plus 0.04 times x minus 0.16y minus 0.16 times y, all right? Minus 8.09x squared minus 8.09 times x caret 2 minus 5.78y squared minus 5.78 times y squared, and then finally minus 5.89xy minus 5.89 times x times y. So there's our evaluation, one-time evaluation. So what I want to do in this table is put in this upper empty corner a rule for where we get the answer if we take pairs of these values and stick them in over here. So that I'm going to get those values from equals z. So I just put that into the upper corner, all right? Now I need to select the entire table, and the easiest way to do that for me is to Control-Shift down and right, and that selects my entire table, all right? I come back over here, including my row for y and my column for x, and the rule for where you get the answer. So now I go to Data on the menu, What If Analysis, Data Table. And it wants to know the row input cell. And where, in other words, where does it take these row items? And it puts them in Y. In the column input cell, it puts them in X. And then I click OK. And there is the complete evaluation using my formula for all of those combinations of X and Y, okay? So that's using a data table. Now what we're going to do is select the interior of the data table. Just the interior. We're going to go to Insert. And we're going to do this one that's called Waterfall Funnel Stock Surface or Radar Chart. And I'm going to come down and I'm going to pick a wireframe contour. And that this is what my chart looks like for the interior of that table. Now, I'll just mention that surface plots and contour plots in Excel are not the best. They're intended for business applications and not engineering applications. So we do the best that we can do with them. So what we can do is we can come in and we see, for instance, that we have 1 through 41, all right, for these particular items. So let's move it to its own chart. Get up here, move to its own chart. And I'm not going to take the formatting all the way, but I'll show you a couple steps with it. And that is that if I go to select data and I do the horizontal axis, it will let me go over and get the X values, all right? So if I come back to my sheet 1, I can take and select all these X values and click OK, and then OK, and then let me get these axis values bigger so that you can see them. And you see it, in order to fit them, it turns them right angles. So it shows my X values, and I can add a label to those. But then I run into a problem, because for the Y values, it actually shows every other one from 1 to 41. And really the only way I can change those for this to meaningful numbers is extremely tedious, because I have to come to chart design, select, and then for series 1, I have to edit that, and I have to put in a name of -2 and click OK. And you'll note if I make this bigger, that it has placed -2 down here. And then I have to do that for every one of those, and that is very tedious. Now, this is where it usually comes into practice, that when you get into contour or surface plots, that you provide a link to some other software where you carry that out, such as Minitab or MATLAB or JUMP, something else, all right? So I'm not going to go through all of that formatting with you. We'll go back and we'll take a look at it on the slides, and then we'll look at a surface plot. So here we go, back here. So this was using the frequency function, and shows all the steps that we did there to produce our histogram, and then bringing in the bin center labels and formatting the bars if we want to do that, adding appropriate axis labels and chart title. And then this was a two-way data table that we showed you how to set up in order to create the data for our surface chart. This was the initial surface chart that was created. And you'll notice it has a legend that goes with the colors that shows the interval of the Z values that are in that area of the contour chart. And then we can go through and we can make these changes, and we can end up with something that looks better, add some axis labels, and end up with a chart that's somewhat presentable. But when you're dealing with this number of data, it's really advantageous to figure out how to use some other software to create the plot, okay? So let us come back and carry out our last example. So this one here, I'll just save it, do a save as here, and call it analytical function contour plot 1. Well, that's saved. And I'm going to open a file now. Which is called NaCl density starter. That looks like this. It's just a series of density values for salt solutions, all the way from very weak solutions up to saturation level, and for 4 different temperatures, 0, 10, 25, and 40 Celsius. And what we want to do is take a look at making a plot of these data, all right? But we're now going to look at a surface plot. And so let us select the interior of this and go to Insert. And for surface, we're going to pick a mesh surface plot, and it immediately gives us this starter for our surface. And apparently it's got the weight percents along here and the 4 temperatures along here. So let's work with this to make it more presentable. The number of data levels here are not prohibitive. We can actually do a better job of it. So let's move the chart to its own sheet, okay? And it looks like that, okay? Now, let's work with this a little bit. You will notice that there's really nothing going on below 1 here, all right? So we will take this particular axis and format it and say that we'd like the minimum to be 1. And then it gives us a much better representation. Let us change the size of this axis to 14 to make it more legible. And we'll do the other 2 axes while we're at them to make it more legible. Even though they're not where we want them to be yet. Okay. Now, let's take care of some labeling here next. First, let's consider this 1 through 9. We'd like those to be the weight percents in our table. So let us come to Chart Design, select Data, and then Horizontal Axis, Edit, and label range is going to be 1 through 26. And we're going to point out a problem with this in a moment, but that's what that looks like. And you'll notice we now have 1 through 26 along this. And then here we've only got 4 series, so we can deal with that. It's tractable. So take series 1 and edit that and just call it 0. We could include degrees C there, but we don't need to. Series 2 edit is 10. Series 3 edit is 25. And Series 4 edit is 40. So now we've got more meaningful values. And then we can then add some titles here, all right, to our plot. So let us go to Add Chart Element, Axis Titles, Primary Horizontal, and this is going to be weight percent NaCl or something like that. Let's make that bigger. Then it is a little bit tricky because we want to add a title over here for temperature. So let's do that. What you have to watch out for here is that's actually the depth selection. So I'm going to type in temperature degrees C, and that makes that title, and we can change it in its size. And it doesn't look the greatest here, and we might like to try to rotate that title. That is one way of handling it. And another is if we take a look at this scale and like we bring it down to 12 point, then it shows all the intervals of temperature. And that now we're getting there. We can add a chart title. I won't take the time to do that here. And then we've got a legend, and perhaps the legend is not where we'd like to see it. So we can format legend, and we can say that we want it to, for instance, be on the left side, and then we can move it somewhere where it's more legible, and maybe increase it to 14 point so we understand what ranges the colors represent. In addition to that, we can come in and look at our grid lines. So let's do that. Chart design, chart element, grid lines. So we can do major vertical here. Major depth grid lines. So we can add some grid lines to make it a little bit easier to read. And then the final thing that we'll do here is that we'll select our plot, and we'll come over and look at 3D rotation under plot options. And we can start looking at the X rotation and change it a little bit to make the surface better. We can look at the Y rotation. We can rotate that up or down, and we can try to get it into a format that is best for us. Perhaps not the best, and certainly you can generate better surface plots using software like MATLAB, all right? Now, the other thing I'll point out, which is a deficiency here, is that you will notice that it is provided equal intervals for 0 to 10, 10, 25. So the first one is 10 degrees and the second two are 15, but it's made them all equal. Also here we've got 1 and then intervals of 2, and then all of a sudden we got intervals of 4, and then back to an interval of 2. And this is your limitation in that these types of plots are really intended for business applications where you're looking at categorical variables like months and years, and the intervals are even. So I want to point that out as a limitation. Let's come back to our slides and wind this up. So here were our experimental data. We just created a simple mesh surface plot, and then we spent some time formatting it, and we note its limitations, and this is the kind of a plot that we ended up with, okay? And one thing you'll notice is it is possible to take this particular axis title and rotate it so it's somewhat aligned with the axis there. Okay, so that brings us to the end of Bootcamp 1 for Excel. This was intended to be a reminder or getting back up to speed with Excel, possibly seeing a few new features. Certainly is not comprehensive, and there are other skills that you have and we have with Excel that are not included here, but you'll be seeing more of these as we go through the next 3 boot camps. So that's it for this one. We provide a reference here of a book that we've written recently, and also we indicate that for the next boot camp, we're going to be introducing the programming with the VBA language with Excel. Thank you very much, and We'll talk to you later.